Now, the questions, as you may well be aware, these questions are not my own. These questions belong to the public. The questions that have been curated for today's event have been donated, if you like, by the public to the Wheeler Centre, and we've chosen what we thought were some of the most interesting and fascinating questions to put to our esteemed panel today. So I'm going to get straight into it, and I'm going to ask, well, I'm going to start with the title of our event and go from there. The title is, Why Are People Nicer When It's Your Birthday?
Well, you know how birthdays pop up on Facebook now? I think because everyone has so many friends on Facebook, the reason they're nicer to you is that they're reminded that you actually exist, because you're not necessarily the first person who comes up on their feed. You might have been friends from way back, like when you had you met each other on an exchange program in Cambodia, but you haven't really had any meaningful contact since then. So of course they're going to be nice to you then, because they're like, that dude. Although on the other hand, I've got a friend who loves that birthday popping up function on Facebook because she sees the people and she wishes everyone a happy birthday that she wants to wish a happy birthday to, and that's the criteria. If she doesn't feel like your friendship is strong enough to warrant a happy birthday, then she deletes you.
Ow.
Happy birthday indeed.
Yeah. I'm actually not on Facebook. I have like a sort of a business page I use, but I don't have a personal page, and it's alarming how few birthday messages I get now on my birthday.
Actually, the opposite is also true. I get all these birthday messages, because I'm on Facebook and all of that, from people I've never heard of, never met, don't care about, don't know, don't think anything of, have no idea. So it's actually created in me, I don't wish anybody happy birthday on Facebook, because I find it so bizarre to be constantly all day long getting these popping, Jane, have a great birthday from I've never heard of you. So, it's kind of devalued it for me. And in fact, I've never noticed people being nicer to me on my birthday.
Really?
Not ever, no. Well, particularly when you're a mother. I mean, children make you some ghastly present and bring you a terrible breakfast in bed, and then you have to get on with it.
And I would agree with that. My eldest is born on my birthday. So when that happened, my birthday ceased to exist.
Oh my gosh.
Pretty much.
Were you trying to delay it?
I was trying to, I was hoping that, you just know that it's not going to work out. And I thought maybe I could lie to her and tell her she was born the day before. Then I couldn't quite bring myself to do that.
My 2-month-old daughter was born at 11:55 p.m. On September 11. And we were just thinking 5 minutes more, then she wouldn't have that ghastly birthday. But
people have to be extra nice to her.
Yeah.
My niece was born on Hitler's birthday. That's not good.
How many cultures celebrate birthdays, actually? That's a question that's only occurred to me now, before. Because I take it that the practice of wishing someone a happy birthday, must be something based on the idea that a birthday should be celebrated, which I take it means that we're glad that this person is alive, exists. I take it that's what's celebrated.
Some people
the actual being of this person. So, and it'd be interesting to know how many. Generally, that must also be an assumption that it's a good thing to be born.
Yeah.
That it's good to come into the world. And it'd be interesting
incredibly
to know
lucky
how many cultures celebrate that, because if it's a general thing, it's usually meant to say, look, we know it's been a hard life, etc., 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 but still, happy birthday. It's good that you're here, good that you were born, not that you got rid of because things were too miserable or something like that.
Or that you were the one sperm that just happened to me. It's so miraculous that we exist at all. My mother never lets us forget the miracle of how we came into the world, because on our birthdays, she SMSs or calls us all, and as much as she wishes us a happy birthday, she actually refers to it as her Labour Day, and it's her opportunity to recount in quite graphic detail, once again, the exact story of our birth from beginning to end. And as much as that's a confronting thing to begin with, over the years, because we're so used to it, the other thing as well is like, wow, you really went through a lot just to make us exist, so that gratitude is also there too.
I brought along something I thought would be appropriate to read. It's only a paragraph. At some point in this discussion, but this strikes me as the point. It's a quotation from Pablo Casals on his 80th birthday, I think. So,
Please share it.
if I can find...
I thought you were about to announce the entire reading of
Oh,
Romulus, My Father, in which case our time is short.
It's not Romulus, My Father. This is what he says in his autobiography. For the past 80 years, I've started each day in the same manner. It's not a mechanical routine, but something essential to my daily life. I go to the piano and I play 2 preludes and fugues of Bach. I can't think of doing otherwise. It's a sort of benediction on the house. But that's not the only meaning for me. It's a rediscovery of the world of which I have the joy of being a part. It fills me with awareness of the wonder of life, with a feeling of the incredible marvel of being a human being. I do not think a day has passed in my life in which I've failed to look with fresh amazement at the miracle of nature. I think that's a wonderful expression. He never uses the expression, it's a gift to be born, but the whole passage is in the key of gratitude. And I suppose that's what lies behind, in the end, wanting to say to somebody, happy birthday.
I wonder, Raymond, to insert a sort of a cynical edge into this, do you think it's a more about the reciprocal nature of it? I know at primary school we used to have Person of the Week. And it wasn't about birthdays, but it was about each week, for 52 weeks or the term time, one person in class was the person of the week. And it was the most amazing experience because everyone had to write in a book nice things about you. Even your school bullies, through gritted teeth, would have to say, he draws good, something. But it was an amazing feeling.
The best one to punch. Yeah.
But you always made an effort because you knew that your time would be coming along. Do you think that's potentially part of these greetings as well? Or am I being too negative?
Well, I'm sure... Iris Murdoch has an expression called the fat relentless ego. It's always there in some form or other. So, but it doesn't alter the fact that such a simple thing, the simple ritual of wishing somebody a happy birthday, is a practice that can take us to wonderful things.
I think it's more than just the reciprocation. I think there's something about the anticipation as well. So in our house, all of our birthdays are at the end of the year, and we sort of enter birthday season, if you like, and they all sort of come one by one, and there's the anticipation of the fact we've got another one coming, and then there's yours coming, and I think there is something in that waiting for something. And so when you're recognising somebody else's birthday, there's also that sense of, and someday soon it will be mine, especially when you're younger. But even when you're older, I think there's a sense of anticipation. For me, my birthday's always when I get it to myself, is always that reflection on what the past year has brought, a bit of that reflection of gratitude, but I do look forward to it. So I do look forward to that time where I know that I'll be able to look back on the year. So I think there is something about anticipation, not just reciprocation.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, my birthday is smack dab in the middle of the year, 24th of June, and I've always been really grateful for that because it means I only ever wait 6 months for presents. It's never any longer than that. It's presents every 6 months, and I really like the neatness of that.
Well, speaking of presents, we'll move to the next question, which is still on happiness. This was submitted by someone who asked very simply, is the pursuit of happiness making everybody unhappy?
I think it is, actually. And I think making happiness an expectation is a problem. Because I actually think that, probably for me anyway, happiness is the management of expectations. So in fact, you're much more likely to be happy if you have relatively low or realistic expectations. It's really easy to be happy if you don't expect much. And you get a little bit more than you expected and you go, wacko, I just got a free cookie with my coffee. Life is good. And because we've given ourselves such high expectations, everyone talks about it as if it's a good thing. We talk about it in education, we need to have high expectations of our students because that's where they'll live up to it. Actually, what we've created is a society where there's no joy, because if you've got really high expectations, so you're going to get 99 in the end of year exams or whatever it is, and you get 99, well, when you get what you expect, you feel neutral. You get what you expect. But there's a big chance you'll feel bad, even if you got 98.7, which in my book, never having got a mark anywhere near that in my whole life, is pretty good. So there's no joy for the high achievers. High expectations create, I think, a lot of misery and a lot of disappointment. I'm perennially lowering. In fact, my children made it their made it their task in life to lower my expectations of them. And no smarter thing could they have done, because I'm really, really happy with them now. And they're really, it's good.
Well, that's why I lobbied to make this event free, Jane.
Correct.
And make sure that people come in.
I know I'm saying it as a joke, but I actually do think it's quite an important thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I find that we even equate happiness with an expectation or an end goal quite puzzling. Because how do you know when you've reached happiness? How do you know when you've got there? For me, it's more a process thing, not a goal or an achievement. But I don't think that's common. So I think a lot of people do think that we reach a point where we can say we are happy and we've got it. We can tick the box and say, yep, this is happiness. Whereas, when you actually do a lot of reading on it, or when you sort of think about the times where you've been most happy, it's not because you've attained something. It's actually because you're in a process, you're in a flow, and that's what happiness is. So I don't think we can attain it. In pursuing it, we're setting up something that actually is never going to work, and therefore we're so worried about. And then the process becomes one of not attaining rather than a process of thinking about being,
And I guess the other thing is, like, we're marketed ideas of what happiness is as well. And it's really hard to necessarily interrogate whether that is our idea of happiness. Like, if I see a really nicely designed room or something, I'm like, yeah, that will be my idea of happiness. It's not like I'm going to get that room in my house or anything like that. But when I sort of lately, because I'm probably I'm in my mid-30s now, but I've always been this sort of anxious, nervous worker. Like, I always need to work, otherwise I sort of feel weird. There's a lot of static in my head. And I work because throughout my 20s especially, and as a writer where there's no guarantee of job success or security, I was working towards this point where, in my mind, happiness would be a sustainable career where I wasn't afraid of being poor anymore. And then in my 30s, I reached that. I have a Foxtel account. Like, I'm rich. I am rich. And when I hit that point, thank you. And when I reached that point, I just thought, I'm not having to worry anymore. What is my baseline for happiness? It's completely shifted. It's, are my family and friends healthy? Am I working in a job that I enjoy? Because I wasn't doing that in my 20s necessarily all the time. Have I swum or moved my body in some way? And has there been a baby around me sometime during the week? Because they're just fun. And that's it. And it's been staggering to me, because for all of the other static that goes on in your life, at least for me, I've found the baseline for happiness is remarkably easy to achieve. And that's, God, I feel like Asian Oprah at the moment. But
look over your seats, everyone. Everyone gets a baby.
You've got me at a vulnerable, gassy time, so I'm just going to be really honest with you. But that's been a nice revelation for me, that I don't need much to get that. Yep.
Well, I think one of the interesting things about happiness is that I think people seldom pursue it themselves, because what they do for this because of the values they see in this or the values they see in that. If I try to explain why I teach, for example, I wouldn't say to make me happy. I'd start talking about teaching and the value in it, and so on and so on and so on. And it's just an old observation. In fact, after the war, a fellow called Viktor Frankl, who was had been in Auschwitz and then invented a thing called what he called logotherapy, but that doesn't matter so much. But what he said is, which I'm sure is absolutely true, is that people don't, for the most part, pursue happiness. They pursue meaning. Meaning is what matters. But what's interesting is that if we think about, I think happiness comes into our thoughts, as it were, mostly when we think about others, as we wish our children to be happy, we wish our friends to be happy. And then we don't always say we wish they have meaningful lives. I just I hope my daughters are happy. I hope and so on. So it's an interesting thing.
That's interesting, that idea of wanting your children to be happy, and certainly I do. But if I'm going to be completely honest about it, one of the reasons I want them to be happy is because when they're happy, they're not making me unhappy. Because, you know what I mean? When your children are unhappy, they unload on you, and you have to get engaged in this particular unhappiness. So there may be a bit of selfishness in wanting your children and your partner and to be happy, because then you can go, good, they're sorted, I can get on with my stuff. Yeah. So I try sometimes to think, no, I'm not. It's not having happy children that's the game. That's the game that you're after. It's having people who are contributing and, you know, who are in some way interesting to have around, and you feel like they're, I don't know how to describe it.
Do you think it would make everything
growing.
simpler if we made the definition, or changed it, happiness as the main pursuit, to contentment? Because that potentially encapsulates sadness as a
Divine
valid...
discontent is what drives the world.
Well, lately the idea that, you know, being sad is not an appropriate, or you know, it's something you should avoid, for example, or being lonely, when all those things are actually perfectly valid and legitimate ways of passing the time.
Yeah, and without them you don't get the opposite. Yeah.
Sorry. I
So-
mean,
No, go on.
there's one thing we know to be a fact, because it's just happened. It's not a matter of theory. That the people have lived lives that have been, as it were, deeply melancholic, but nonetheless have had in those lives moments of transcendent, moments of joy, which are almost, which I it's interesting. I reach for the word transcendent, but I'm not a religious person, so this is not metaphysics, but it can create in them, despite their persistent melancholy through a life, the same kind of gratitude for their life as was expressed by Pablo Casals. And we know that just to be a fact about people's lives, because they've expressed this. There was a philosopher, Wittgenstein, who had a terribly unhappy life, in part actually because you might call his divine discontent, his complete, constantly thinking he'd failed to do philosophy according to the standards that he required, which were moral standards. You know, he bemoans his disposition to vanity, for example, because he thinks it pollutes the enterprise. But on his deathbed, he said to his doctor, he said, "Tell them," meaning his friends, "that it's been a wonderful life." And what was fascinating about this is it wasn't an assessment of the good and ill in the life. You know? It wasn't saying something like, it wasn't open to someone saying, "Hey, Wittgenstein, you sure it's wonderful? Maybe just okay." You know, he wasn't placing himself on a line of misery.
Wasn't a measure.
To there. It was an expression of gratitude, even in those sort of the same kind, actually, as a result. And we know, and as I say, we know this to be a fact about human life.
And that just reminds me that, you know, we sort of have this idea of happiness or contentment as a very sort of blanket type of thing. There was an essay that Zadie Smith wrote a couple of years ago on the difference between joy and pleasure, which I found tremendously helpful, because for me it then started to give me some really good definitions about the difference between, for me, happiness as a process, for pleasure about the sensation of feeling something that made me feel warm, and joy, which is really almost an element of surprise in it. You know, and joy can come from a very deep, dark moment as well, but there's something light in that dark moment. And I think for me, separating those ideas of joy and pleasure, contentment and happiness as actually quite different experiences gives a much richer experience of life than just striving to be happy.
There's maybe something too in the idea of happiness is actually a form of kind of stability or equilibrium, where you don't feel out of balance, because somebody very wise once said to me that happiness is a point on the continuum between boredom and fear. And what they meant by that was, if, for example, you become very melancholic, depressed, lethargic, can't be bothered getting out of bed, you've probably got too much boredom in your life and not enough risk. You need to up the risk. And if you get really, really head up, anxious, insomniac, you know, overwhelmed, you've probably got too much fear or risk in your life, and you need to up the boredom and the safety and the predictability. And it seems like a really neat way, and I have actually used that occasionally, and it's just a little mechanism for going, oh, okay, that gives me, I need to get back to equilibrium. Maybe that's what we kind of mean by happiness. Not pleasure, not joy, but just not out of balance.
Yeah, I like that.
On that note, I will lead to another question which I think says possibly more about the person asking it. But I'll throw this out there. Somebody asked, why is it that everybody seems to be searching for true and fair friends, but so few people are apparently willing to be that for others?
Last thing I want is a true or fair friend. Really, how boring. I want a subversive, funny, dark, weak, hopeless, tells me all the bad things they do, all the times they fail friend. Those are the people I feel most comfortable with.
You're such a writer, aren't you, Jane? You're just thinking, you guys make the best material.
Yeah, that's right. But also then I don't feel inadequate. A true and fair friend would just make me feel inferior, and also I wouldn't believe them. I'd be cynical. What do you want?
That'd be such boring dinner party conversationalists as well. Like, I want... What I love in my friends is how flawed they are and how ready they are to admit their flaws as well. And I'm willing for them to screw up in our friendship as well, because I mean, like, I've got a lot of family as well. Like, those are the people... Like, you guys can do what you want. If you screw up our friendship, that's fine. I'm sure we'll address it at some stage. But I just want you to be interesting, and I want you to be curious, and all the mess-ups. I mean, like... For me, in my writing, I think one of the most interesting emotions to explore are shame and embarrassment, and they can often lead to great comedy as well. And those are the stories that I really want to hear.
Me too.
Truth, fairness. I mean, yes, I want that in my journalists. Do I need it in my friends? Probably not.
But also, you know, the second part of the question was, you know, why aren't more people prepared to be that way? Do we ask ourselves that question about what sort of friend am I very often? I'm not sure that we do that very well. I was just thinking about what sort of friend am I, and I think I'm coming up short. That to me is a much more interesting question to the guts of it. Is what sort of friend do you think you should be, or what sort of friend are you, and what sort of friend do you need to be? What do you offer? Yeah.
I've over the last few years since becoming a dad, I've had that really relevant, because I'm such a poor friend in general. Objectively, I don't get back to people. I can't see people. I don't leave the house. But I sort of...
But you can't at the moment.
Well, exactly. And the friends who have children understand that, and the ones who don't, I figure I'll just have to see them in 50 years at the school reunion.
The last thing I want, though, is a friendship which is based on some sort of obligatory pressure where, you know, there is a rules of behaviour where I have to do this and then they have to do that. I can't bear those friendships anymore. I had them when I was young, and I would know that, oh, they've rung me more often than I've rung them, and I better make that up. I can't bear those friendships now. I want the friendship where I haven't spoken to you for 2 years, we run into each other and it's like we saw each other yesterday, and there's no guilt attached. There's no obligation. We know we like each other, and it will come to a point where we meet up again, and that'll be fine. That's what I want out of a friendship. I don't want a guilty... I don't want to feel, what kind of friend am I? I'm the friend I'm able to be. Sometimes that'll be good, sometimes it won't be so good. So what? Live with it. I'll let you be the same.
Yeah. And my mum's got a rule, which is you're either the friend that everyone comes to, or you are the person who has to go out and make friends. And I don't know whether that's related to extroversion or introversion or what it is, but our family is a family of we have to go out. If we want friends, we have to go out. They don't come to us. Mm-hmm. And I've been trying to explain that to my daughters, that it's no point sort of sitting hoping your friends will come to you. You have to go out and make those friends and be a friend first if you want friendship back. Mm-hmm. Mm. Some people find it the other way around, and that's fine too. But for us, that's the way it works.
And maybe it's because I come from a big family, and maybe because at heart I'm such a family first candidate. But my family does come first, and I think it's such a huge challenge in and of itself to be a good family member. Do you know what I mean? To be a good son, to be a good sibling, to be a good parent. It's so hard enough that friends should be your release valve. You're like, oh, can I just tell you about this hideous thing that just happened with my family? I love that function of my friends, that they provide that sort of neutral base that I can have a funny conversation with. And that's different. I think if you're on your own out there in the world and you don't have a family to rely on, you do rely on your friends in a much different way. But I find the challenges of family enough.
Yeah, but it seems to me that friends are chosen. Family are not chosen. And by definition, if something's chosen, then it's chosen for certain kinds of reasons. And if they change, then you lose it. And it's not typically the case. It's thought that it shouldn't be the case with family. But both the concept of friendship and the concept of being a father or a mother or a brother or a sister, they have standards in them. They're not always the standards of morality, because love can sometimes conflict with morality. but it has its own standards when
Yeah.
it does so, you know. And it's fundamental to the concept of love that we distinguish the real forms of it from its many forms of generally egocentric distortions. So they're there for us. I mean, it's not as though moralists necessarily impose them. They're part of the concepts we grow into. And as for friendship, I have to disagree. I don't think I do disagree with you actually, because deeply. But if your friend's in trouble and you don't have the courage to stand for them, that's a bad friend, and then you should feel guilty. There's an obligation in friendship. If you're not truthful to your friend when that friend really needs it, you failed your friend, and you should feel guilty for it. So
I'm feeling guilty right now.
the idea that you could have friendship without the possibility of guilt strikes me as foolish, if I might put it this way, as that you could have love without the possibility of sorrow.
Well, on that note of love, let's go a little deeper, my friends, and ask this question. Do soulmates really exist? And if so, what's the chance you're going to meet them?
I've met mine, and she's sitting right there. And she's
So of all the 7 billion people in the world...
That's how it feels.
Brilliant.
I mean, I don't know what the 7 million is supposed to mean. I mean, it's part of the idea that we have an idea that every human being is unique and irreplaceable, but we don't mean by that they have features that nobody else has, right? So if we lose the one we love, we don't think, if you're a man, her twin sister will be a fair substitute, you know, which is a bit like if
Hopefully.
So it's not based on any. There's a sense in which it's not based on anything. This sense of the uniqueness of another person. So if someone were to say, "Oh, but objectively is she unique?" It's saying objectively she's not. And in this case, the thought of all the how many billion in the world doesn't impinge on the sort of God. Now I was speaking personally in a way I hadn't expected to, but doesn't impinge on the sense it was miraculous that we came together from so many. We're so different from so many different parts of the earth, and that there should be the. Anyway, I'm not. This is getting embarrassing.
No, it's getting fascinating.
I've identified myself.
It's really lovely. And I mean, I've been with the same partner for 40 years, and we met when I was 17, and we started going out when I was 18, and we started living together when I was 18. But I don't believe in soulmates. He's the person. He's become so much part of who I am that to lose him, I think, would be to lose part of my body. But that doesn't mean that I don't see him. And sometimes he doesn't drive me nuts. And sometimes I don't drive him nuts. But we, I think, accept each other as we are and as we have changed over 40 years. Because the problem with the idea of a soulmate, which we were talking about before we came out here, is that it feels like you found them, now they should stay. Just like that. Because otherwise, but shouldn't, I think, a good relationship, whether it's a friendship or a love, partnership of long and loving, or a parenting, what doesn't matter, is you should be helping that person, and they should be helping you to grow and change and become bigger and better and doing bigger and better things.
Well, that's what makes them a soulmate.
Well, I suppose, but I don't believe in a soul, so it makes it really hard.
Yeah,
so it makes it really hard.
I don't believe in mates, so it's all...
I believe in that. But I think that therefore they'll change, and there'll be times when they change in a way you don't like very much. But that's necessary, so that's okay too. But you love them enough for you to live through that period.
It really depends on how you define soulmates, right? Like, I have these really intense conversations with my mum quite a bit, because she always loves the idea of soulmates, destiny, fate that one person out of the how many billion people are out there who's just for you, and all you have to do is to be able to meet them. And to me, that idea terrifies and horrifies me, because it implies, like, what happens if you don't meet that person? What if they're in Bangladesh and you never visit? And also, what happens when you do? Do you just suddenly, are you a key and a lock and it just clicks and it just opens? I think anyone who's been in a long-term relationship knows that it involves just deep reserves of compassion and love, and also work as well. And I feel like, I mean, to personalise it, I've been with my partner for well over a decade, and part of me doesn't talk about him and our relationship too much in public, partly because of privacy, but also partly because I think it can hurt people when they hear about relationships, because it's hard to find love in a lot of cases as well. But for us, it's been this period where we've grown together. We're such different people than we were when we started. And for me, the idea that two people are destined to just meet and that's the rest of your lives together, it's like a dog that's chased a car. Like, what happens next? What happens when you actually catch it? But for me, it's so much more interesting when you can evolve and change together, work at it. I actually find that process really exhilarating when someone you've been with for as long as you guys have been with your partners perhaps still surprises you, still reveals something about you that you would have never guessed. There's still history to learn as well, and it challenges you as well. I like the challenge of a relationship, and I think it's a big adventure.
Can I just add one quick thing? I just did a series with Compass at the end of this, only a few months ago, about long-lasting relationships. And I asked all the couples in the end, why do you think you've survived as long as you have? And the line of the program came from Anne, who'd been married to Dan for 72 years. And she said, well, I know why. And he was quite surprised and said, well, why? And she said, because I have a lot of forbearance. I think there's something really quite powerful in that. The ability to just stand back and let the other person be who it is that they need to be.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, and thanks to Raimond for sort of setting the scene and being so personal, that I do believe in the soul. And for me, it is around coming together as a collective, and there's something magic that happens through conversation, and there's something amazing that happens through deep connection when we can be truly vulnerable with each other, when we're prepared to be truly open. And so while I don't think the idea that there is only one person available for us, I think our willingness to go to that deep place where we are truly open is fairly rare. And then the ability to run into somebody else who is also opposite you, being truly open, is pretty rare. So for those things to happen at the same time is magic. And I think that's where it really sort of sparks that feeling of a soulmate, because you are looking into somebody's eyes truly and deeply, and they are looking back and you are both open. And it's such a rare moment that I think that's something worth celebrating and something worth finding.
I think that for me, when I read that question, I thought, well, yeah, I don't believe at all that there's one person out there for everyone, but together you can then become each other's soulmate through that work.
Right.
Yeah, that's the sort of backwards response to it, I guess.
Yeah.
But can I just say something about that, Caro? Because when you say you believe in souls, I could agree with everything you said without, and I don't know if you meant when you said I believe in souls, whether you believe in immaterial substances or anything. No, okay.
No.
Soul, this is what I, in fact, want to say about this comment. So we ought not to be too literal about some of these words. When somebody says this is soul-destroying work, you don't say, oh, shit, I didn't know you believed in the soul. You have to have a tin ear for tone.
Yeah.
And the same when somebody
metaphor.
says destiny. You don't have to think, God, you have a causal theory, the determination of the universe.
Definitely.
Let's not take those. Let's be...
This conversation is I wish I could stay for another hour, but I'd be fired from ever returning to the Wheeler Centre who have a schedule. So we are going to move shortly after one more question to audience questions, but I have to put this one out there. It was submitted by somebody online, and it's very appropriate because I got held up on the way on my tram through some friendly neo-Nazis up near Spring Street on their way to some sort of gathering. If the nation went to family therapy, who'd say what and why?
What was the question?
If the nation went to family therapy, who would say what and why?
I mean, well, first we need to decide on who's there, right? Like, I feel like Keating would be there. I feel like Greer would be there. Who else?
Well, I know what Malcolm would say. I know exactly what he'd say. He'd say, it's never been a better time to be in this family. And all we need to be is agile, dynamic and innovative. And this family will be the greatest family
And the moderator
the world
would
has
say,
ever seen.
Malcolm, you've been saying that for 47 minutes, so let someone else have a turn, Malcolm. Who else would be there? Malcolm or Paul, or maybe groups of people, maybe groups of our... Obviously, there's,
Yeah. I mean, I love any film that has group therapy in it, right? So I'm in my mind right now, I'm really paying attention to the casting process. And I just feel like whoever the Indigenous representative, I wonder whether they'll be listened to, I'm curious about that, considering they should have a much bigger say.
I guess perhaps an equally bigger question is who'd be moderating, and obviously, hopefully, Tony Jones in a godlike beard, the most appropriate candidate. It's sort of a question that demands its own panel, I think.
Yeah,
or its own
it's such a mind-bending question that my brain has actually astral projected into space right now in the difficulty.
Perhaps we should just limit it to the 5 most recent prime ministers in a room together. That would be a good enough therapy session.
Yeah.
Well, I think we can answer that question, yes.
Yeah.
I feel that was covered in the killing season, wasn't it?
Well, Tony would be babbling about death cults, wouldn't he?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think
Julia Gillard would be talking about moving forward, as
and working families.
And working families, but yeah. That's a tough one. I mean, like, I've been having this conversation lately because I'm working on a documentary that covers, part of Sydney's history, and I actually feel like maybe it's because we're such a young nation, but we are constantly moving forward. I think we've got this. I'm relatively young, and I'm guilty of it myself. Like, I feel like we're still only starting to get a grasp of our history, our family history, our national history. The history that I was taught at school was bunk history in a lot of ways, now looking back as well. I feel like if there was a national therapy session, the histories would be deeply contested as well.
A lot of recovered memories.
Recovered memories, exactly, manufactured ones in there.
Yeah. Obviously, denial would be a big topic in any therapy. And there are obvious points of denial you raised to Indigenous peoples. But there's a more general denial about politics itself. I mean, where politicians don't talk about governing, they're talking about running the country. It was actually astonishing, for example, when during the last American elections, when Romney was persistently saying that he was qualified to be a president because that had been a successful business person. Not once did Obama ask him, why do you think being a successful business person has anything whatsoever to do with being president of the United States? Because the answer was sort of implicitly there, because we're running things, aren't we? We're running enterprises. And even with the question of the economy, you would ask, why do you think running a business is a qualification even for being the treasurer? Because you're dealing not with shareholders, you're dealing with citizens. Where did we lose the concept of being a citizen? We're just taxpayers these days. So that would be a big question about how come we're in denial about the very stuff of politics.
And I just keep going back to sort of those family agreements that you might write up. And I keep thinking about the national anthem, and we can't really agree on that anymore either, so I think we're doomed.
On that positive note, we'll throw it open to the taxpayers. Does anybody here have a question? And may I just say, it's a pretty rare moment to have this panel on stage at your beck and call, so enjoy the chance.
Hi. Going back to the conversation about happiness and privilege, happiness earlier, attaining happiness, how much do you think it crosses over with privilege? Because I'm from a very low socioeconomic area, and we were kind of taught, you need to survive, don't worry about being happy.
Look, I think that's a really good question, and I'm reminded of some work we did with the Australian Academy of Sciences looking at the future of Australia in 2050. And the work that we were doing in my group was to look at a biophysical model to say, are there limits to where we can safely operate the planet, you know, in terms of what climate looks like and what biodiversity looks like. And we were saying, were there similar limits that we could look at in terms of the social perspectives? You know, were there safe operating limits for people? And what did that look like? Apart from death or destruction at the end, what is the safe operating limit? And where the biophysical limits are quite stark and you can make some fairly good judgments about them, we found we couldn't make any judgments around what was safe operating spaces for people, because people respond to situations in a whole lot of ways, some of which are predictable, most of which are not, some of which are rational, a lot of which are not. People have different degrees of resilience. They have different degrees of responding to crisis. Trauma for some is a strengthening agent. Trauma for others is destructive. So there is no safe operating space that you can define whereby you say beyond that we're in trouble. Because for some people they will be, but for others they'll thrive. And to me, part of the answer to that question is, you know, why not be happy? We can't make assumptions on what you need in order to have a space that is safe and a space that can allow for things to thrive. So I'm going back to a very theoretical model to describe that. But I think to me there's something around that about not determining any boundaries on what makes people happy that might be relevant.
And I think you can make a good argument. Australia's the most prosperous it's ever been. But is it happy? Is it the happiest it's ever been? I don't think it is. I sometimes wonder if prosperity doesn't drive anxiety. And sometimes real poverty is terrible and extremely hard for people to be happy, and particularly when it breeds chaotic environments, particularly for small children, we know the consequences of that. But there's a point at which you've got enough, where you might not be considered privileged, but you've got enough. And I think if we look at communities that are poorer than we are now, they often have a lot of hope because they've got little to lose and a lot to gain. When you look at societies like ours, we've got a lot of fear because we've got a lot to lose and we can't see how much more we've got to gain. So I sometimes wonder if we equate material prosperity with happiness, and we're actually completely chasing a false god, because there seems to be no evidence that it's actually increased the happiness of this nation, despite Malcolm Turnbull.
Well, it's just obvious. I mean, it's a platitude that material possessions don't make you happy. It's just not controversial. But sometimes the absence of material it depends on why there's an absence of those material possessions in a person's life, and if it's the cause of just resentment, then it's no longer just the absence of material possession. It's the injustice that causes the unhappiness of being a victim of injustice. Because we all know that if someone steals your money, right? Say a friend steals your money, you say something like, "It wasn't that money. It's you were," to go back to friendship. "You were my friend," you know. And people feel that about injustice often. Injustice usually brings with it material losses of some kind. But often it's not the material loss that is the deepest focus of the resentment. It's the injustice that it's the expression of. And in a society like ours, where wealth is glorified to the degree it does, people like that who are justly resentful are then insulted by being told they're just envious, and that compounds the injustice. But as far as material possession goes, it's just a truism. Everybody knows that. Everybody knows that there are times when someone has got what everybody thinks to be everything. They get cancer and they're 45. They ask themselves, was it worth it? Is this what I want? These are, as it were, moral platitudes.
What your question reminds me of is a study that was done. I forget where I read it, but it's such an obvious truth that if you don't have a certain baseline of prosperity, you have limited options, obviously. And as you get more prosperous and your options increase, you do get happier in terms of your lot in life. But then as your income escalates, it sort of tips over onto the other side of the bell curve, because so much of your mental capacity is worrying about the management of your wealth, because you haven't had it. Like, say you are that person that started on one side and you advance to the other, because you're so acutely aware that you didn't have it to begin with, your stress sort of tips over into this whole other realm. And it reminds me of the whole balance thing as well. It's such a strange thing. It's not like you reach this goal and suddenly ding, 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 you're happy. It's this weird middle part that you have to constantly manage. And I guess on a personal level, your question just made me think of my family, actually, because in some ways my mother was a refugee twice. She had to flee ethnic violence in Malaysia, and then in Hong Kong she fled again. Like her parents fled the Sino-Japanese War. She fled Malaysia, ended up in Hong Kong, married my dad. Hong Kong was a place where neither of them were particularly rich, and they were really intent on giving their kids a middle-class upbringing, which is what they did in Australia. So I had an aggressively middle-class suburban upbringing, but I only got that because their options were limited, and within those parameters, they worked super hard, far harder than I have ever worked in my life, to give us the opportunities that we completely take for granted now. And I think, all of us can extend our imaginations to our parents' usually more limited opportunities than ours, but I think as a kid of migrants, you're always asking those questions of what if, what my life would have looked like if those stories that my parents told me applied to my life. And yeah, I'm aware of those discrepancies in opportunities for sure.
Thank you so much. I think someone's on a motorbike outside, and God bless them. Does anybody else have a question for our panel?
I do. I was struck by the title, Why People Nicer on Your Birthday, when I recently travelled business class instead of cattle cart class, and the flight attendants were just so much nicer, even though it doesn't cost the airline more. And so bringing that back to the question of happiness, if you work for a .com company, there is much more of a focus on happiness for people who work there. Why is it that hasn't spread outside of that arena, and why aren't more workplaces focusing on happiness for the people that work there?
I think we've created largely, and I don't know about the .com companies, whether that's real happiness or that kind of cult of happiness, which is the opposite. But we've created toxic workplaces. I think the workplace is a much harder place to be in now than it was when I was starting out in workplaces in the 70s. Partly this is 24/7 and all that kind of stuff. But it's also because for 30 years, the mantra of management has been fire people when things get tough. And so what that has done is created an atmosphere in the workplace of fear and isolation. Even if you yourself have never actually been fired, you've watched people around you get fired constantly. And every time they, Telstra or somebody fires 5,000 people, what happens to the share price? It goes up. So there's this constant, we're firing ourselves and then buying more shares on the strength of it. It's really weird. And I think that I do believe that most workplaces these days are characterised by exhausted people working incredibly long hours who are really frightened about keeping their jobs and therefore their incomes. And it's pretty toxic out there in an awful lot of workplaces.
I wish I knew more. I don't work in a workplace, so I'm by myself at my desk in my underwear.
Have you flown business class before?
I have, but that was when my my editor booked me. I had to do this work job, and I was just booked into business class because it was some sort of business arrangement.
You don't have to apologise.
Yeah,
I know, but I feel so apologetic because for me, even to be on a plane still feels magical, and because I'm pretty small statured, like economy class even feels quite luxurious anyway. So when I'm in business class, it just feels ridiculous, like someone who's very tall should be here anyway. But I don't know what the question was, but yeah, my point is I have no experience in the modern day workplace.
It is, the oldest twee expression that a smile costs nothing, but these days when I walk into a shop, and I sometimes feel like they're angry that I even walked into their shop trying to give them money.
Whereas I have the opposite thing, because I went shopping yesterday and I managed to find a way through the department store where I didn't have anybody looking at me and smiling at me, trying to attract me into what they were selling. I just had to duck around because
You were shoplifting though at the
I
time, so
wasn't
you have to be
shoplifting.
quite
I don't-
specific in your movements. But,
No, I think that question about workplace happiness is a really good one, because I think a pool table in an office does not make you happy. It makes you work longer hours and make you feel like, you know, that you're getting something in return. But, you know, I think a lot of those sort of tricks and techniques are not really delivering on better employee outcomes, better work outcomes, or better company outcomes. We see better outcomes when we're working with organisations when they are aligning people to the purpose of the organisation and aligning the purpose of the organisation to be expressed through individual purpose as well. So when you've got alignment between what you really value and what the organisation is doing, then you're likely to be happier in the workplace, and that's much better than a pool table or some, you know, floating bouncing balls that you can play with in your spare time.
Well, they're doing things in companies like Google and stuff where women are being encouraged and subsidised to freeze their eggs so that they can have babies later. That's toxic.
That's toxic. Completely toxic.
I was reading the other day a piece about the popularisation of adult colouring books, because that's just what I read in my spare time, but that because there is some sort of scientific proof that this really calms the brain, they've been distributed so widely in all of these workplaces because it just moderates people's mood. And I didn't know whether that was amazing or horrifying. That's what we need to be sedated to bear the brunt of what happens to us in the modern workforce. I was tempted to get one after where I read that piece. But beyond that, it was kind of slightly nice but slightly nightmarish to read that.
Yeah, I don't think we've solved the problem for work in the future either. So I'm doing lots of work with schools on, they say we're preparing us, we've got a 21st century education. I say you're 15 years too late for that. So what's the 22nd century education model look like? What does it look like? And what does work look like in the future? Because we've still got an education system which is preparing people for factory work. For very regimented ways of thinking, and we're not aligned. And I don't think we know what work should look like. And if you look at all of the artificial intelligence stuff that's coming through and all the automation stuff, it doesn't look like it does today. And it doesn't look like not paying musicians and graphic designers for their work either. So I think that's... we're totally off topic now, but I'm just reflecting back on, what would make us happy at work. And there's so many bigger questions to be asked about what is work and what should it be like. I think that underpin that question in a more broad way as well.
Well, I think what people want at work is in part to be respected, and sometimes they're insulted by programs designed to make them happy at work, because they know that sometimes this is something we didn't discuss before. But some forms of happiness are degraded. And nobody wants it. People distinguish always between happiness and real happiness. And real happiness is often a rather moralised concept, actually. But what it brings out is the fact that some people could find happiness in some things only if they degraded themselves. And sometimes this happens in the workplace, it seems to me. That it's almost as though the bosses want to put happiness pills in the water, and so that people don't feel the degradation of what they're doing. And this goes back to a very old... It's not so old, it's my lifetime. But I don't hear it talked about anymore, the dignity of work. And so when you start, we have to think of what work is. One of the things we have to think about is what the dignity of work can be, and not pretend that every job can intrinsically have meaning. Right? Sometimes work took on dignity for people only because they knew this is... imagine your parents, for example. Only because... I don't mean only your parents. Because this is what will feed the family. And the dignity lay in doing that. And they didn't pretend that shoveling dirt was itself a meaningful activity. And it would be degrading to them to pretend that shoveling dirt was of itself. Right?
And there's a whole lot of things in what's called motivational psychology and inspiration, which is exactly what you're describing. It's so degrading, so patronising, and so utterly insulting to people. That's what I mean by the cult-like happiness. There's a wonderful book. I can't believe I'm recommending someone else's book at this festival, but it's Barbara Ehrenreich's Smile or Die, The Cult of Positive Thinking and How It's Destroying the World. And it's fantastic.
On that note, we have run out of time, my friends, or reached our time, I should say. Please give a massive round of applause to our incredible panel, Raimond, Jay, Ben and Kristin.